Today, we're going to be taking a look at every single interesting card from the brand new Pokemon TCG set, Mega Evolution. Mega Evolution will be released with a ton of exciting new cards to try out on September the 26th, just in time to be played for tournaments from the 10th of October onwards.
The Mega Evolution expansion brings us the new mechanic of Mega Evolution. These Pokemon can be basics, stage 1s or stage 2s, and these Pokemon instantly Mega Evolve. So in this case, you could go from a Bulbasaur into an Ivysaur, skipping the Venusaur and going directly into a Mega Venusaur EX. Same thing for Abomasnow, you'd go directly from Snova straight up into your Mega, jumping from a 1 prize Pokemon to a 3 prize Pokemon, because when these Mega Evolution Pokemon are knocked out, your opponent takes 3 prize cards. Mechanically, these cards are entirely different from our first version of Megas back in the X and Y block. We no longer evolve from multi-prizes, we no longer require Spirit Links, and yes, now they're 3 prizes, not 2, so they're more of a callback to VMAX Pokemon or Tag Team Pokemon if you're looking at the basic Mega Pokemon these days. Just inherently, having 3 prize Pokemon in the format completely dictates and changes how prize maps may be functioning for a number of these decks. Similar to how we saw the Tag Team era or the VMAX era, where in some instances some decks will completely forego any 2 prize Pokemon and only fill their deck with single prizes and Megas in order to give up 2 single prize knockouts and still force 2 Mega Pokemon knockouts, effectively forcing your opponents to take 8 prize cards worth of Pokemon to actually complete a 6 prize game. Of course, there are also going to be a number of Mega Evolution Pokemon that can't function in this way, and will still have massive drawbacks as to when you put them into play, but bear in mind that as you get towards the late game, where your opponent is just 1 or 2 prize cards away from closing, having a 3 prize card, 300 plus hit point Pokemon in the active position is certainly going to force your opponent into a strange situation if they're not playing one-hit KO decks. In fact, generally, one-hit KO decks just got a little bit better because we've started to push that hit points even further with a number of these 3 prize Pokemon, making these decks that can scale their damage output really effective in the format, and also might give a greater emphasis on type coverage and hitting for key weaknesses in the metagame to still generate those situations where you can have this huge burst of damage into crucial matchups.
Just some housekeeping before we start then. As always, we've used our 5-star rating system. You can see them on the screen right now as to how we rate cards. And we have, of course, included the community ratings that you guys took part in recently, so that we've got the community's feedback on how they think these cards are going to fare as well.
Getting into the trainers then, we're starting off with the Fighting Gong. This allows you to search your deck for a Fighting Basic Pokemon or a Fighting Basic Energy, reveal it and put it into your hand. Fighting gets a lot of support in this set, and the Fighting Gong is just one of them, really buffering up our consistency here to give us even better odds to find our basic Pokemon, but also, when need be, access to a Fighting Energy. This allows us to skimp out on our physical energy within our deck, knowing that the Gongs are more flexible options. This is already really handy in a Garchomp or Lucario style deck, where they generally have efficient attack costs. There's no need to play more than like 10 energy in your deck, and the Gong allows you to be even cheekier in this case. Even if you're not going the full 4 copies, because Buddy Buddy Poffin is still fantastic, just having this as an Arvenable one-of gives you that flexibility of, say, an Earthen Vessel, but is simply an upgrade in your opening hands if you're lacking those Poffins, just giving you extra outs to play the game. There's also a really interesting looking pair of Solrock and Lunatone from this expansion that benefit both from having early game Fighting Energy Search, so you can use the Lunar Cycle ability from Lunatone to start drawing cards, but also these cards need to come together and they're 2 Fighting Basic Pokemon. I can already foresee this package going into Lucario, going into Garchomp, possibly even into Ceruledge as well, and having 4 Gongs within your deck gives you great access to both of these basic Pokemon in order to start attacking with your Solrock or using your draw from Lunatone. Overall, thanks to the consistency boost this card offers, plus the damage boost that a Premium Power Pro item offers, I think Fighting is looking really promising in the next set, so we're giving this a really solid rating here, feeling like it's going to make it into all of these decks, be it a 1-of or a 4-of, it's always going to find a way to work itself into the list.
Next up then we have Iron Defender. Iron Defender is an item card that says, during your opponent's next turn, your metal Pokemon take 30 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon, including Pokemon put into play after you play the card. Now obviously we've got a couple of relevant metal decks right now. Goldengo was one of the most hyped decks going into the World Championships. It had a huge buff from the previous set, and there's no reason to believe people are going to stop playing it now. And our Chaladon EX gets a fantastic new attacker in this set, which we'll be talking about later, which could end up meaning it becomes more popular again, which could be another home for this item card. Unfortunately though, the biggest issue with this card is how much one-shot we have in format right now. Sometimes there will be situations where 30 damage is make or break for whether your opponent can get a knockout, but with cards like Goldengo, cards like Raging Bolt, all of these Pokemon that don't have a damage cap, they're just going to discard more energy to get around Iron Defender. It'd have to be a much bigger damage reduction for this to warrant playing these cards in your deck, especially when you probably need to play multiple of them at a time for them to be relevant. Typically these defensive type items aren't particularly good. They're often better on tools so you can get multiple uses of the damage reduction, and because of that I really don't think Iron Defender is going to be particularly impactful.
Next up we have the Mega Signal item card, allowing you to search your deck for one Mega Evolution Pokemon EX, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. This is the classic case where it's a situational card that is only going to find the Mega Evolution Pokemon you're trying to build around, and is far less versatile than something like an Ultra Ball that will still be the maximum 4 copies in the majority of decks, but the Mega Signal gives you the option for an Arven Search or a Jewel Seeker option from a Noctowl. For example, I'm already thinking of a Kangaskhan, Bouffalant, Terapagos style deck, and one Mega Signal is obviously going to be a great include here, where you can Jewel Seek for the card when you need it, and not be forced to discard when using an Ultra Ball. It feels like right now, until we have a Mega Evolution Pokemon that can draw a bunch of cards, the Mega Signal is mostly going to be a one-off within these decks if you feel like you're lacking that little bit of extra search, especially because this is great for grabbing evolutions, and most of our evolution search is coming from supporters right now, so this does stand out a little bit as an item option.
Next up then we have Premium Power Pro, another item card that says during this turn, attacks used by your fighting Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Now this effect is fantastic. Obviously this harks back to things like Electro Power or Power Tablet. Both of those cards were incredibly impactful and Premium Power Pro is going to be no different. Being able to deal up to 120 damage in 30 damage chunks in sort of any orientation you want is going to make fighting type Pokemon so incredibly flexible. They're going to be able to reach one-shots on things like the Mega Pokemon, but also much more flexibly deal with basic and Stage 2 EX Pokemon, depending on exactly what type of deck they're up against. It's going to make fighting decks incredibly aggressive, and it might even mean some of the evolving fighting decks, some of their basics can still take KOs themselves, things like Cynthia's Gible or Riolu. These decks are going to be able to try and take cheeky one-prize KOs with their basics to try and start that prize race early. I think pretty much every fighting deck over the next couple of years will be trying to play for Premium Power Pro if they are that aggressive strategy. But there are a couple of highlight Pokemon that I think Premium Power Pro really helps. The first is of course Mega Lucario. We'll be talking about Mega Lucario a little bit later on, but Lucario is already an incredibly efficient attacker, and it's a very low maintenance deck, which means there's going to be lots of space for things like Premium Power Pro and other damage modifiers, making it even more efficient. We've already got a couple of good Riolus as well, which like I mentioned can potentially benefit from this card to be able to start the prize race quite quickly against other evolving decks. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to push Aura Jab to be able to KO some basic EX Pokemon, but you could very easily push Mega Brave to be able to KO some Stage 2 EX Pokemon for just 2 energy. And given that this can be done with just 2 Premium Power Pros, that means you can potentially do it a couple of times during a game, meaning that you probably just have to get your last couple of prizes from a bench-sitting support Pokemon. Cynthia's Garchomp is another fighting Pokemon that could really benefit from this card. Now statistically, its base damage is much lower than Lucario's, and it is a Stage 2, but Cynthia's Garchomp also has Cynthia's Roserade to buff its damage, meaning that a combination of Premium Power Pro and Roserade buffs can potentially mean that Corkscrew Dive can KO basic EX Pokemon, and Draconic Buster could even KO Mega Pokemon in one shot. Cynthia's Garchomp hasn't had a huge amount of success so far, but it's got all of the tools to be a successful deck with inbuilt consistency and already having some great damage buff options. This new item card could push Cynthia's Garchomp to being a top tier deck. And finally then, the third fighting Pokemon that could really benefit from this card is Greninja EX. Now unfortunately the Froakie and Frogadier aren't fighting types, so they can't make use of this like Cynthia's Gible or Riolu can. But Shinobi Blade already deals a base of 170, which means with a couple of Premium Power Pros you can easily be one-shotting bench-sitting EX support Pokemon, whilst also tutoring cards out of your deck, and still just having that option for Mirage Barrage against evolving basics once you've used up all of your premium power pros. There's also a brand new Lunatone and Solrock combo in this set, and the Solrock is very similar to Fan Rotom in that it can apply early game pressure with its Cosmo Beam attack, which obviously can be buffed to some very, very powerful numbers with Premium Power Pro. I think there's definitely going to be plenty more applications for Premium Power Pro. This is an incredibly powerful card. We know that just from historic data alone. And I think every fighting deck going forward is going to have to consider this. And similarly, every time you sit across from a fighting deck, you're now going to have to keep in mind they can deal up to 120 damage more than you think they can.
Next up, we have the reprint of Repel, forcing your opponent to switch their active of one of their bench Pokemon. We already have Iron Bundle in format. This is a searchable option of Repel in an ability that can be recovered, so I think the bundle is always going to be superior to Repel if you're including one copy within your deck. Obviously, the Iron Bundle isn't disrupted by the Budew either, so there's so many reasons why Bundle is just the superior choice, so Repel is pretty pointless right now until that bundle rotates.
Next up then, we have the Suspicious Watch. This is an item card that says choose one of your evolved Psychic Pokemon and put any number of its evolution cards back into your hand to devolve it. Now, you can't re-evolve this Pokemon after you've devolved it, but if you have another of the Pokemon that it evolves from on your board, you can immediately evolve that one instead to potentially double dip on some very powerful abilities. There are a couple in this set that immediately come to mind. The first is an ability shared by Kadabra and Alakazam. It's the Psychic Draw ability that in Kadabra's case lets you draw 2 cards when you evolve from Abra, and in Alakazam's case lets you draw 3 cards. Now again, you can't just cycle these over and over again in the same turn, so you're not going to be able to tear through your deck quickly, but it does potentially give you some more draw power, though having them go back into hand means they are prone to things like Iono. There's also a brand new Grumpig in this set with the Energy Step ability that lets you look at the top 4 when you evolve it, and attach any basic energy you find there to your Pokemon. Now this is an incredibly slow energy acceleration engine, but if you're able to get a couple of Spoink down on the first turn, you can potentially evolve into Grumpig, use Energy Step, attach some energy, then use Suspicious Wop to grab Grumpig back to your hand, to evolve another Spoink to use Energy Step again. Like I say, this isn't particularly reliable, but Suspicious Watch does open the door to abilities like this being potentially abused if decks can be built around them. A card like this also means you have to go back and look at all of the other Psychic Pokemon that we have in format right now that potentially have coming into play abilities. Now, unfortunately, right now, the only one that we could find that looked at all relevant was the Mismagius from Paldea Evolved. It has the ability Magic Flick that lets you move an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon to one of their benched Pokemon when you evolve from Mischief. Now, moving energy is often better than discarding energy because it sometimes gets trapped on Pokemon that otherwise wouldn't be able to use it, and I'm sure some control decks will play this in some kind of combination. A 1-1 or 2-2 Mismagius and a couple of Suspicious Watch to potentially move a couple of energy throughout the game where you don't have to rely on things like Hammerheads. But I can't see this being particularly impactful in normal decks, especially given that it takes so much space to be able to make use of this effect. Suspicious Watch is the kind of card you have to keep in the back of your mind, and just consider every time we see a new ability from a Psychic Pokemon that has a coming into play effect, but right now I don't think the applications are going to be there for this card.
Next up, we have the very interesting Acerola's Mischief. You can use this card only if your opponent has 2 or fewer prize cards remaining. Choose one of your Pokemon in play, and during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage from and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX. So essentially, you're turning one of your Pokemon into a mist-energied Mimikyu, and as we know, on crucial threats, this can be a great way for you to attempt to checkmate an opponent. That's the dream scenario, at least, where you have no other multi-prize Pokemon on your board for your opponent to take the final 2 prize cards to win the game. However, in practice, due to the nature of this card, you're probably never playing more than 1 copy. We don't have fantastic search for supporter cards unless we have other multi-prize Pokemon in play, like Pidgeot EX, for example. And actually, there are so many decks in format that can take 2 single prize knockouts, avoiding a big 2 prize KO altogether, that I think a number of decks could even play around the Mischief as well. So I think between that, the fact that Boss's Orders is almost always the late game win condition for a ton of decks regardless, I rarely think the Acerola's Mischief is going to be superior to Iono Disruption, especially if your deck is crafty enough to play around Pheasantipity, for example. I think that's almost always going to create a better win condition for you, and of course Iono is usable throughout the entire game and is a consistency buff, which trumps Acerola's Mischief by far. This actually is a bit of a throwback to the Fantina Lossone card, which saw absolutely no play, and although the Acerola seems more powerful on paper, I still think it's going to be too narrow in the format right now.
Next up then, we have Lillie's Determination. This card is incredible. This might be the best card in the set. It's a supporter card that lets you shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 6 cards, but if you have 6 prize cards remaining, you draw 8 instead. Now this is basically a combination of 2 fantastic supporters we've had in the past, Cynthia and Lillie. Cynthia was a very consistent supporter throughout the game, just giving you access to some very, very healthy shuffle draw. But shuffle draw that was unconditional and always meant that you got a good amount of cards back. Whilst Lillie was a draw supporter that let you draw until you had 6 cards in hand, but would let you draw until you had 8 if it was your first turn of the game. Now the effect of this card is slightly different. You do have to have 6 prize cards remaining for you to be able to draw 8 cards instead of 6 after shuffling your hand in. But in a lot of cases that's better because it means that you do get access to the 8 cards on turn 1 as you would have with the original Lillie. But also, if you're not playing an aggressive deck, it's very unlikely that you're going to take a prize card before the second turn of the game, which means you could potentially Lillie's Determination again for another shuffle draw 8. And even when you do start taking prize cards, this just returns to being a Cynthia, which was still one of the best draw supporters you could see when you'd started taking prize cards, because the amount of cards you drew wasn't dictated by how many prize cards you'd taken. This meant that it was an incredibly consistent supporter card, went in stage 2 decks, went in basic decks, went in all sorts of different decks, and I really don't think Lillie's Determination is going to be any different. I think all of the stage 2 decks will get a huge buff from Lillie's Determination. They already have Arven, so I don't necessarily think this is going to be a 4 of, because Arven tutors out the specific things you need. But when you need multiple combo pieces to be able to get going, Lillie's Determination is definitely going to be favourable, especially if you haven't started taking prize cards yet. I think stage 2 decks will play a couple, some may even play 4 just because of how powerful this supporter is. But it wouldn't surprise me if this goes alongside Professor's Research, or even sometimes overtakes Professor's Research as the additional draw supporters stage 2 decks play. I do think potentially some aggressive decks could play this as well. Some of them are obviously very locked into playing specific supporters like Professor Sada's Vitality, but I still think this could be a powerful one-of in decks like those, just because again those decks are often full of combo pieces, so having a couple of copies of Lillie's Determination as additional draw supporters alongside things like Vitality means that you can potentially try and backdoor your way into attacks by just drawing a huge amount of cards instead. It's never going to overtake supporters like Professor Sada's Vitality in decks like Raging Bolt, because ultimately Professor Sada's Vitality is the backbone of how you're doing your damage. But I do think it's potentially a decent addition to aggressive decks, as they're capped as to how many of their main supporter they're able to play. It's also great to just have more draw supporters in the game. It means that everyone gets to play the game more consistently, and we have less opportunities for people to just lose the game because they didn't draw very well. I really think Lillie's Determination is going to be a fantastic card. It's an easy 5-star card for me. And I can't wait to start playing some decks with Lillie's Determination to really feel how consistent they're going to get, having such a powerful supporter available.
Next up we have the Lieutenant Surge's Deal Supporter. What a fun card we have here. You ask your opponent if they agree to have each player take a prize card. If your opponent agrees, you both take a prize. If they don't, you draw 4 cards. So in a lot of instances this will read as simply a draw 4, but of course you're giving your opponent the agency here. So if ever they say yes to you both taking a prize card, that normally means that you've helped your opponent out and got them closer to winning the game. Possibly they close the game immediately after you've done this. On top of that, you get 0 draw on certain turns. So if your opponent's being smart about this, it's absolutely horrendous. It's really cool that we've seen a card like this. I don't think we have ever seen a card printed like this, apart from Unknown N, that had the Nod Poker Power back in the day. And players have constantly debated whether a raw draw 4 was too good and would be played in every single deck. And clearly, if the card designers have decided to put such a big drawback on this supporter, they also think that a draw 4 is just too good. So unfortunately, they've had to handicap the Surge around this really wacky text.
Onto another supporter card then, Wally's Compassion. This says heal all damage from one of your Mega Evolution Pokemon EX. If you do, put all energy attached to that Pokemon back into your hand. So this is very similar to Cheryl from back in Battle Styles, but Cheryl did require you to discard your energy, whereas this one requires you to put them into your hand. Now obviously this can only be used with Mega Pokemon. There's 10 Mega Pokemon in this set, but we're going to have Megas coming out for the next few months, I think. So the uses for this card will grow and grow. But I think realistically 4 of the Megas that are printed in this set could make use of Wally's Compassion and really try and push the fact that these Mega Pokemon have such high HP. The first is Mega Venusaur, and I think this is probably the best use of Wally's Compassion. Mega Venusaur's Solar Trans ability lets you move the energy around, so you can move all of the energy off of Mega Venusaur, use Wally's Compassion to heal all of the damage off of it, and then move all of the energy back on to attack again. You could even use Wally's Compassion in a locking strategy in combination with the Bulbasaur in this set and Relicanth to just have a big retreat locking Pokemon that you just sit and heal behind that is very low maintenance, you only need 1 energy to attach. And from there, you're trapping your opponent with a 380 HP monster. We'll talk a lot more about the applications of Mega Venusaur later on in the video, but I think this is probably the best use of Wally. Though Mega Camerupt is another incredibly efficient Mega Pokemon, its attack only taking 1 energy and dealing a lot of damage, meaning that you could potentially use Wally and then just reattach the energy you've had to put back into your hand to be able to continue a cycle of dealing a lot of damage for a low amount of energy on another huge Pokemon. There's also Mega Manectric. A lot of people are really excited for this card, and its Riot Blaster attack already discards all of the energy from it to deal 330 damage, which means there's no downside to you using Wally if Mega Manectric survives a hit. And then very similarly we have Mega Latias EX. This is actually a basic Pokemon, which means once again it's incredibly efficient and low maintenance, and similarly to Mega Manectric, Mirage Pulse discards all of the energy from Mega Latias, meaning that there's no downside to Wally once you've used it. Now, I do think, as I said, the best use of this card is probably going to be Mega Venusaur, but I do think all 4 of these Pokemon could see play in different decks, and therefore any of those decks could play a single Wally's Compassion to try and reset the opponent for a turn, and make it just that little bit harder for your opponent to try and take 3 prizes from one of these Mega Pokemon. As mentioned, it's another card that will naturally just get better with time the more Mega Pokemon we have in format, so it's one to keep an eye on going forward as well, even if it doesn't have any immediate impact.
We then come to the Dangerous Ruins Stadium card. Whenever any player puts a basic Pokemon, except for Darkness Pokemon, onto their bench, you put 2 counters onto that Pokemon. And damage counters is a real topic of discussion for a number of the Stage 2 decks in our format. Almost all of the decks, like Dragapult, Gardevoir, Grimmsnarl, they get really creative with their own damage output, from Phantom Dive Sprinkle, from Shadow Bullet, Bench Pressure, and of course from Adrenabrain via Monkey Dory in Gardevoir and in all these other decks as well. So no doubt, adding Dangerous Ruins to your own deck to activate your Monkey Dories faster, so as soon as that hits the board, they can immediately Adrenabrain 2 over to the opponent, does make the likes of Phantom Dive and Shadow Bullet much more dangerous. Gardevoir's already a deck that can generate a ton of damage for itself, but just the fact that possibly your opponent is forced to bench Pokemon and take an initial 2 then means you can be much more proactive at setting up those Devo plays or sniping down that Pokemon very quickly. In a lot of instances, this can lock your opponent out of benching Pokemon before they find a stadium bump. With so many of our basic Pokemon right now having 70 hit points, they just stay out of the threshold of that Phantom Dive. Now suddenly they're right back in range. Do I think these Stage 2s have much space for a card like this? No, not really. A lot of our Stage 2s are just playing a couple of stadiums at most. But bear in mind that both Guardy and Grim are playing the Secret Box, so even a one of the Dangerous Ruins seems quite valuable if you can time this correctly to get immediate Monkey Dory action, or just to put your opponent in that strange situation of not being able to put down Pokemon, in fear of it being immediate fodder for prizes.
The next stadium we have is Mystery Garden. This is another stadium card that supports Psychic Pokemon. Whether you love to see it, whether you hate to see it, this is definitely one that I think Gardevoir is going to play. It says once during each player's turn, that player may discard 1 energy card from their hand to draw cards until they have as many cards in hand as they have Psychic Pokemon in play. Now, could you have written a better stadium card for Gardevoir EX right now? They often have a board full of Psychic Pokemon. They want to get energy into the discard pile. They want additional draw now that they've lost Refinement Curlier. This is quite literally the perfect stadium for Gardevoir. I think this will easily be played in Gardevoir in a 1 or 2 count. I think Artisan is still incredibly important for those hands that don't give you much ball search, so that you have an additional out to finding basic Pokemon with Artisan from your secret box. But in those hands where you have a huge amount of Pokemon or ball search already, you're potentially going to be able to search for Mystery Garden from secret box instead, and start drawing cards much earlier than you'd usually be able to, and in ways that aren't reliant on Supporter card, which is one of the biggest things that Gardevoir has to do right now. All of its draw is based on supporters or things like Fezandipiti and Mew. I don't think this is going to be a 4 of in Gardevoir because I think Artisan and other cards in the deck are far too important, but it's another card that Gardevoir can just put into play with no real downside. It's a little bit of support for playing against cards like Iono. If you can try and get a Mystery Garden into play, your opponent has to try and find a Stadium Bounce as well. And it just gives you a bit more consistency throughout the game. Again, that in combination with things like Mew draw, Fezandipiti draw, Supporter draw, you can once again draw a lot of cards with Gardevoir, trying to piece together all of the different combos it can do much more consistently. I do think there are potentially a couple of other applications to Mystery Garden though. Basically any deck that plays Psychic Pokemon can play Mystery Garden for an additional amount of draw throughout the game. It's not going to be quite as impactful as it is with Gardevoir, but it can get you out of sticky situations here and there. We have a lot of different Psychic type supporting Pokemon right now, things like Monkey Dory, Latias, Mew EX, even the Dusknoir package. All of these Psychic Pokemon naturally fit into a lot of different decks. And a lot of the time, I think that means Mystery Garden could potentially draw up until you have 2 or 3 cards in hand, which can be enough to top you up and get you over the line to get into a draw supporter to then start propelling you towards more of your combos. Like I say, there's plenty of decks trying out Monkey Dories right now. There's plenty of decks that play Latias and Mew as a bench-sitting draw engine. This could even be a draw engine for something like Future Box, because they often have a lot of Iron Crown on the bench. You could potentially have lots of different opportunities to draw multiple cards to try and beat another of these aggressive basic style archetype that normally didn't really have much draw power to support it. Now I do think this card is obviously going to see application and best used in Gardevoir, whether that's the normal build that we have right now, or whether you're maybe trying to build around the new Mega Gardevoir EX we'll talk about later on. I think either way this will see play in Gardevoir in some way, shape or form. And even though that's probably only as a 1 or 2 of, I think it's very impactful and will definitely make or break games here and there where you wouldn't have normally been able to draw some cards. I must admit it is a shame it wasn't for another type, but it's not like this is the card that makes Gardevoir good. So Gardevoir was going to be here anyway. This is just giving it an interesting stadium card to help it draw in the mid-game as well.
Another stadium we have is the Surfing Beach. Once during each player's turn, that player may switch their active water Pokemon with one of their benched water Pokemon. So definitely very limited scope here in that your deck basically has to be entirely water to really get the most out of this stadium card. But there are a couple of interesting applications here. The first one that came to my mind was the really interesting Palafin EX, which is a really overstatted stage 1 Pokemon that has the awkward text Giga Impact that means that you can't attack next turn. So now you have this great stadium card that can allow you to jump between your Palafin EX and even your basic Palafin that can then hero to 0 into another Palafin EX. It has great synergy here for you being able to bounce between your Giga Impacts. I did have a look from a sort of broader spectrum, and the only basic water Pokemon that we have right now that has free retreat is actually Mantike. Bit of a shame because it only has 30 hit points, making it a real drawback to put into play. So this isn't going to be this like nice universal pivot for water decks, I don't think. More so, it's going to be about pivoting between your attackers. There is a new Clawitzer that I'm going to mention as well later on in the video that might have some good synergy with Chenpao, the Chenpao pulling out the water, then going straight into Clawitzer to attach them. So I do think there might be a couple of nice low-tier water decks that can try and take use of this card, but right now, water really isn't a prevalent type in the game, so there isn't really much of a home for a card like this right now.
The final trainer of the set is Vitality Forest. This says each player's grass Pokemon may evolve into a grass Pokemon on the turn they were played, except on that player's first turn. If any of you were playing back when Forest of Giant Plants was around, that card was incredibly powerful. But one of the biggest reasons it was powerful was because you could use it on the first turn, and we had an item-locking Vileplume in the format that meant going first, your opponent could potentially never play an item card if you were able to evolve into a Vileplume straight away. I really do not think we're going to see that same effect from Vitality Forest. We don't have an impactful, oppressive Grass-type Stage 2 Pokemon like Vileplume right now in format. And just the fact that you can't use this on your first turn makes it far weaker than Forest of Giant Plants. But I do think there are some decks that will want to use this, particularly decks like Mega Venusaur, that naturally would be quite slow otherwise. Given that after turn 1 this is Forest of Giant Plants, I do think there is room for this card to be quite powerful. And the ability to get things like Mega Venusaur out in one turn does feel like it will be quite useful for pushing that deck to be good. But I'm really pleased this hasn't been paired with something that isn't fun to play against like Vileplume. There are also plenty of other grass-type Pokemon that you may want to consider when thinking about this Vitality Forest card. There's a brand new Meganium with the Wild Growth ability that we'll talk about that doubles your grass energy in play. But there's also some other older Pokemon that are still important to think about. We have the Serperior EX from Black Bolt and White Flare. We have the Yanmega EX from Destined Rivals. We have Whimsicott from Prismatic Evolutions, and Ledian from Stellar Crown. And we also have the 151 Gloom and Vileplume, which can potentially accelerate some energy similar to the Grumpig I talked about earlier on with Suspicious Watch, that you could potentially build an energy acceleration deck around. Fortunately, none of these sound like they're going to be unfun to play against compared to Item Lock of the past, and I think the best application will be in some kind of Venusaur deck, maybe in combination with the 151 Venusaur as well. We'll have to wait and see, but this is definitely a card you'll have to keep in the back of your mind for whenever a new grass Pokemon is printed, as to whether being able to accelerate them into play quite quickly from turn 2 will push that card to be good.
Mega Venusaur EX is a Stage 2 grass type with 380 hit points and has the ability Solar Trans and the attack Jungle Dump. The Solar Trans ability allows us as many times as we like during our turn to move a basic grass energy from one of your Pokemon to another of your Pokemon. We know that it's quite easy to flood grass energy into play thanks to Teal Dance from Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. This Solar Trans ability allows Mega Venusaur to be a pretty viable tank actually, with the synergy of Wally's Compassion. You can Solar Trans all the energy off your Venusaur that's taken a hit, Wally it without discarding energy, and then Solar Transing all those energy back onto your Venusaur to continue attacking with Jungle Dump. An attack that for 4 grass energy deals 240 damage and heals 30 from this Pokemon. That little chunk of healing can be augmented even more with Shuckle, with the Ferment Juice ability, where once during a turn if it has a grass energy attached, you may heal 30 from one of your Pokemon. This has obvious synergy with Venusaur where you can just trans to the Shuckle, then trans it back to your attacker, giving you a free heal. This is like a Monkey Dory, but you don't get the damage on your side, but of course it works with grass energy, which is ideal for your Venusaur to attack with. One other element of this archetype worth noting is in fact the Bulbasaur's attack here. For a single grass energy, Bind Down deals 10, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. That tech should be a massive alarm bell for players. As we know, corner and other trapping style effects are always dangerous in the TCG, but the fact that we can use it on a 380 hit point Mega Venusaur with incredible tanking potential is a real issue here. We of course have Relicanth, so we can be copying that Bulbasaur attack and sitting up front with a 380 hit point dude that also has a bunch of inbuilt healing. So even certain attackers that can start hitting the Venusaur, they have to hit a high enough threshold that they actually two-shot the Mega Venusaur for it to even be that impactful. Otherwise, the likes of Shuckle, the Jungle Dump heal, the Wally's Compassion, all of this stuff can accumulate and make it so that you're really undoing a bunch of damage even if you're being chipped away to buy turns against the opponent. I think it's very possible that a Mega Venusaur tanking, sponging, annoying deck is going to be a thing. Similar to old Celosaur where it had Shamins trying to heal the entire time, the Shuckles will be chipping in quite nicely. There is a Venusaur EX that also has the Tranquil Flower ability, but it only works when it's in the active and it has a 4 retreat cost, so I don't think that naturally synergizes with the Mega too nicely. The other option would be trying to compete with the Ho-Oh Armarouge deck, where we just shove in the Prism energy and simply play the best basic attackers we have access to. The likes of Iron Hands, the likes of the new Mega Kangaskhan EX is another potential sponge that also adds draw power, alongside our Ogerpon to flow these energies, similar to how a Ho-Oh EX would. The trade-off is that you have to play rare candies towards your Mega Venusaur, but the upshot is that the Mega is difficult to take out of play at any point, and is a really useful type coverage attacker in its own right, that also gives you the backdoor corner trapping plays into a handful of matchups. I think there's enough synergy in the format to make this card pretty powerful. It really comes down to just how much one-hit KO is in the format, and how many switching cards they incorporate into their decks to see how effective this strategy will be. Of course, into those one-hit KO matchups, if they don't play enough switching cards, simply an army of Bulbasaur and Gusting effects could win you the game on the spot anyway. Similar to how we see Tech Maractus in decks that are timed effectively, perhaps we can start the game off immediately with that Bulbasaur and start draining your opponent's resources from the get-go, putting them in that strange situation where they have all this damage potential, but they can't actually capitalize it because you're never evolving into those Megas until it gets down to the very later stages of the game, hoping that all of these bind downs has put your opponent into a strange spot.
Our next Mega Pokemon is Mega Camerupt EX. It's a 340 HP Fire-type Stage 1 Pokemon. With 2 attacks, it's got Roasting Heat and Volcano Meteor. Now, Roasting Heat, I think, is the selling point of this card. I've already talked about it a little bit, but for 1 energy, you deal 80 damage, and if your opponent's active Pokemon is burned, this attack does 160 more damage. That means after the burn tick, this is effectively 260 damage for just 1 energy. Now that is hugely efficient damage. That's easily going to be two-shotting anything in the format. It's going to easily be one-shotting any bench-sitting basic Pokemon, even ones with a Bravery Charm potentially, which is really powerful. And in some instances, because it will be the burn that gets the knockout rather than the damage, there'll be times where it doesn't even activate things like Vezendipity's ability to give you a little extra boost. We have a couple of ways of applying the burn status condition in the format right now. The best one is probably Volcanion EX. This has seen a little bit of play here and there as a damage modifier already. Its Scalding Steam ability burning the opponent's active Pokemon if it's your active Pokemon. You can then just easily retreat out with a Latias into your Mega Camerupt and deal 260 damage for just 1 energy. That's probably going to be the most reliable way of applying the burn status condition, but we do have the Volcarona from Black Bolt as well, with its Torrid Scales ability letting you discard a basic fire energy from hand to burn your opponent's Pokemon while sitting on the bench. With that being a stage 1 Pokemon, you can use something like Hyper Aroma or Jack or Brock Scouting to be able to search for multiple stage 1s at once as well. So that could be a different way of building around Mega Camerupt. Instead of having the basic engine of cards like Volcanion and Latias, you have a supporter-based engine that's built around Volcarona instead. I've already mentioned Wally as well. Wally works really well with Camerupt because you only need to attach 1 energy. You can easily take a hit, then use Wally to put the energy back into your hand, heal all the damage off, and reattach for Roasting Heat on the following turn. And right now, I think water is the best weakness to have because there's very, very few water decks out there at the moment. So that means your opponent is probably going to have to try and deal 340 damage in 1 hit rather than being able to rely on weakness, as they would against other Pokemon. I think this deck will potentially feel very similar to the Colossal VMAX we had from back in the Sword and Shield era. Now that deck didn't have crazy high heights, but it did provide a very efficient attacker, and some decks just couldn't deal with how efficient that Pokemon was. And I think the same will potentially be able to be said about Mega Camerupt. It would just be too efficient for some decks to get over if they don't have a particularly good way of dealing with Mega Camerupt in 1 hit. There is also a Baby Camerupt from the Paldean Fates set. This Camerupt deals 240 damage with a reversal energy, so you naturally have a wall-breaking Pokemon, a 1-prize attacking option, and a Pokemon that you can power up with 1 energy attachment to be able to still get through some walling Pokemon out there, as well as having another Pokemon that can naturally uptrade into 2-prize Pokemon to try and offset that prize trade once again. Decks that have attackers that give up different amounts of prize cards often do really well at offsetting the opponent's prize map, so just having this Camerupt as an option is really cool as well. It's also seen a little bit of play in Japan with things like Goldengo EX and Dragapult EX, just showing how versatile Mega Camerupt is. I'm not sure either of these ways of playing Mega Camerupt will be better than playing something like Volcarona or Volcanion, but seemingly there could be something here if it's being paired with so many different partners. It's really cool to see Camerupt getting some love. It's been a long time since we've had a good Camerupt card, and whilst I don't think this is going to be crazy high in the tier list, I do think there are some things to like about Mega Camerupt, and I'm really excited to give it a go.
Onto Mega Abomasnow EX. It's a 350 hit point water-type Pokemon that has the Avalanche Hammer and Frost Barrier attacks. Frost Barrier isn't all that interesting. For 3 water, you deal 200, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. That really isn't blowing me away, but the Avalanche Hammer is at least an interesting approach here. For 2 water energy, you discard the top 6 cards of your deck, and you deal 100 damage for each basic water energy discarded in this way. Now, potentially, you can have a meme variant of playing like 30 or so water energy to give you a fairly reliable Avalanche Hammer, but then you completely forego anything to do with consistency, and essentially you're hoping to run into other Megas where you can announce this attack twice and maybe you just win the game on the spot. I think more rationally, we actually play this similar to like an Aquastorm Kyogre, where it's like a late game finisher style card. If you can run your deck down to the bottom with a number of research, maybe Explorer's Guidance, maybe even Brilliant Blender, if we can really cycle our deck low, there's a potential to have Mega Abomasnow as a small package with Energy Recycler, and the Avalanche can be this big late game swing and can give you a big 1-hit KO. Now, that's actually quite a substantial package you have to play here, where you probably need to play like 8 or so water, plus at least a 1/1 line of Abomasnow. It requires 2 energy to attach to it as well. There's a lot of commitment and issues with this approach compared to something like Kyogre that you could burst out all in 1 turn, provided you were playing Lost Box or whatever. And Aquastorm was simply a better attack as well, because you could sometimes take 4 prizes off this thing, maybe even 5. Whereas the Abomasnow is only really going to shine if you're hitting into an opposing Mega. Overall, yeah, good meme potential, probably too much room to fit in as a late game bomb, so I think this one's going to be rated low right now.
Next on the list, we have Mega Manectric EX, a 330 HP Stage 1 Lightning type with 2 attacks, Flash Ray and Riot Blaster. It's also got free retreat, which is always a nice added bonus, especially for lightning types, because it means that they can use things like Electric and Electric Generator much more effectively. The original Mega Manectric was incredibly popular, and whilst it didn't have any major successes at things like Nationals or Worlds, it was still a very influential card, and I'm pretty sure this Mega Manectric might also be quite good. Flash Ray says during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon. Any attack that denies your opponent from attacking has to be considered, and when we have so many big basic decks right now that just try and be aggressive, things like Miraidon, things like Raging Bolt, all of these types of decks, being able to completely deny them from dealing any damage to Mega Manectric, that can be very powerful, especially if you're able to orchestrate the board state so that you only have a Mega Manectric on board. You can then just announce Flash Ray for the rest of the game every turn, and your opponent can't do anything about it. Now obviously if you do have some bench Pokemon, your opponent can use some Gusting Effect to get them into the active, and using a combination of Iron Bundle or Prime Catcher alongside Boss's Orders, using 2 of those different effects in one, it will mean your opponent does have the ability to push Mega Manectric to the bench and then bring it back up to the active spot, getting rid of that Flash Ray effect. So I don't think this will become a completely locking deck, because I think there are multiple ways you can get around it. And it won't always be reliable to set up a board state where you just have Mega Manectric EX on the board. But it is a nice option to have, especially alongside something like an Iono, to try and buy at least a turn back from your opponent just using Flash Ray and stopping them in their tracks. Riot Blaster is Mega Manectric's second attack, for 3 energy dealing 200 damage, and if you discard all of the energy attached to Mega Manectric, you deal an additional 130. That's totaling 330, which is obviously knocking out pretty much all of the Stage 2 EX Pokemon in the format. It doesn't quite reach Mega levels, and that could be an issue if we end up moving towards a Mega heavy format, but you do knock out some of them, including opposing Mega Manectrics yourself. And obviously we do have some damage modification in the format to potentially push Riot Blaster to getting KOs on some of these Mega Pokemon that you wouldn't normally be able to. Now discarding energy is sometimes seen as a downside, but being a lightning type we have lots of ways of accelerating energy. We have Electric, we have Electric Generator, we have Magneton. So there's lots of ways of being able to power up multiple Mega Manectrics throughout the game to try and use 2 or 3 Riot Blasters to just close the game in 2 or 3 attacks. Naturally, being an electric type as well, Electrike can be searched out with Miraidon's Tandem Unit ability, so it should be quite consistent to get Mega Manectric going. And with all that energy acceleration that Lightning has, we should reliably be able to get Riot Blaster going on turn 2 quite consistently most games. It's just going to be about whether we can chain that attack multiple turns one after another, or whether the deck will sort of fizzle out in the mid to late game. I think Mega Manectric pairs really well with Iron Hands, because Iron Hands can deal with the low HP basics and take 2 prizes on those, while Mega Manectric can take KOs on the big EXs, similar to how Zekrom EX and Iron Hands work quite well with one another. But obviously Mega Manectric is much tankier, and I actually think there could be an avenue for a Mega Manectric Magneton deck, where instead of playing all of the different lightning type attackers and electric generators and electrics and things like that, you just have Mega Manectrics and Magnetons, and you can essentially use 2 of Magneton's ability and then still force your opponent to have to go through 2 Mega Manectrics throughout the game. That's going to force them into an 8 prize game scenario, whilst you're able to Riot Blaster at least twice during the game, dealing 330 damage, effectively ignoring the downside of Magneton's ability. Now it is worth keeping in mind, Psyduck with the Damp ability is coming out as a blister promo for this set, so cards like Magneton and Dusknoir that knock themselves out could be potentially a little bit weaker. We could end up in a format where you have to work out whether your opponents are teching for cards like these or not, as to whether you can try a strategy like this. But I think the raw stats of Mega Manectric are just very impressive, and that kind of archetype alongside Magneton could be really powerful. It won't do anything particularly flashy or exciting, but it's just going to be a consistent damage output turn after turn, whilst also making your opponent go through 2 Mega Pokemon. You could even throw an Iron Hands in there. I think that starts to make things a little bit more complicated, because then your opponent can try and take a knockout on that Iron Hands and not have to go through 2 Megas. But a strategy like that could be very interesting when trying to build around Mega Manectric. That's not just in the usual lightning way with things like Miraidon, Electric Generator and Electric as we see at the moment. It's a little bit scary that fighting gets so many buffs in this set. It could mean that Mega Manectric's weakness is a problem, but hopefully all of the fighting decks will be countered by grass and psychic type decks, which would potentially mean Mega Manectric does have a place in the upcoming metagame. I think this is a really cool card. I don't necessarily think it's going to be doing anything crazy, but cards that often just have solid stats end up being powerful one way or another.
Just what we needed, more support for Gardevoir, with a couple of nice upgrades for our evolution line. The new Ralts has the Collect attack that can get us into games in a pinch, and the new Curlier's Call Sign attack is another great consistency option, allowing us to search the deck for up to 3 Pokemon, reveal them and put them into our hand. It's not something you always want to do, giving up your Curlier is rarely advisable, but as long as you have backup Ralts or Curlier in play already from a TM evolution, this can be a panic play that you go for just to get you into those games. The real talking point, of course, is the Mega Gardevoir EX. It's a stage 2 with 360 hit points and is a psychic type, with 2 attacks here, the Overflowing Wishes attack and the Mega Symphonia, both costing just a single psychic energy. With Overflowing Wishes, for each of your bench Pokemon, you can search your deck for a basic Psychic Energy and attach it to that Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. This doesn't have great synergy with the Gardevoir EX per se, because we would actually much rather them in our discard pile to throw all onto one target, but it can be a way to filter out some amount of Psychic Energy, and actually synergizes with our other attack here, the Mega Symphonia, which deals 50 for each Psychic Energy attached to all of your Pokemon. That means for one Psychic, as long as we have one on each of our bench Pokemon, we can deal 300 damage here. Now, as a card within traditional Gardevoir as we know it, I don't see this being that strong of an option, because you already need to have a great board state with multiple Gardevoir EX in play to really make the most out of this as a late game like Iono option, and you give your opponent that spot of like, can you find Gust, as I've just used a big Symphonia here and taken a big KO. Normally, it's actually better for Gardevoir to not take a knockout when it's doing the Iono strats to play around Pheasantipity EX anyway, so I think Gardevoir as we know it probably doesn't actually want to play this card. However, there is the possibility that we're going back to like a 4-2, 2-2 split of your Guardies and Mega, and lean into the Mega Symphonia massively, and the regular EX sort of just chips in for Monkey Dory math here and there, or to be a backup attacking option when you're up against the one-hit KO decks or the Dark decks that can deal with your Mega quite happily. Mega Symphonia is really dangerous damage output in its own right, similar to Drifloon, and it really shouldn't be too difficult to maintain a board state where the Symphonia is taking knockouts turn by turn if we have a Gardevoir EX online that can reload attachments if your opponent is targeting down your bench Pokemon, or if they're able to KO a Mega on the previous turn. Although this is starting to sound like a really high maintenance multi-stage 2 style deck, it all branches from the same evolution line, and we know that Psychic has so much support that it's hard to rule this one out. The question really remains, will the Mega surpass the already very powerful basic EX builds that rely more on single prize Pokemon to gain incremental advantage, or just having the big slogger of the Mega in your deck?
Onto Mega Lucario, a stage 1 340 HP fighting type. With 2 attacks, it's got Aura Jab for 1 energy, and Mega Brave for 2. However, just before we get into the attacks, it's definitely worth noting that Mega Lucario is weak to Psychic, which I think right now is a really bad weakness to have, given how popular Gardevoir is, how many cards that deck gets in this set to make it even more consistent, as well as how splashable Lillie's Clefairy EX is right now. However, that being said, Mega Lucario has had some success in some early Japanese tournaments already. It's a very, very low maintenance attacker. Aura Jab is fantastic for 1 energy, dealing 130 damage and attaching up to 3 basic fighting energy cards from your discard pile to your bench Pokemon in any way you like. This basically means that once you've attacked once with Mega Lucario, you can set up 1 or 2 more Mega Lucario on your bench with that first attack, meaning that you have to worry a lot less about finding energy every turn for the rest of the game. Aura Jab deals 130 damage, which is great for KOing evolving basics, but we've already talked about that Premium Power Pro card, the item card that buffs fighting attacks by 30 damage. That means Aura Jab can potentially even be one-shotting some bench-sitting EX Pokemon with a couple of these Premium Power Pros, initiating that prize race super early, whilst also knocking out potentially key Pokemon on your opponent's board. It's also worth noting this card is actually searchable by Salvatore as well. This card hasn't really seen any play at all, but being able to get a 340 HP stage 1 out on turn 1 of the game that can then attack for 1 energy and deal 130 damage and accelerate energy, that could be a use case for Salvatore. It could finally be the time. I really don't think that's going to be the best way to build around Mega Lucario, but it is an option that's there already. With any of these Stage 1 Megas that don't have an ability, Salvatore has to come in mind as to whether you can try and really push the boundaries of what you can do on the first turn of the game. In terms of getting some energy into the discard pile, we obviously have lots of ways of discarding cards right now, things like Professor's Research, but also things like Ultra Ball and Earthen Vessel. All of these cards can help get energy into the bin, but there's also a brand new pair of cards, Solrock and Lunatone in this set, which we'll talk about later on, that help with that process, with the Lunatone discarding energy to draw cards during your turn. And because all of these are fighting Pokemon that discard fighting energy, you can use that fighting Gong earlier on to make these fighting decks even more consistent. Your early turns, you're going to have lots of ball search, you're going to have lots of ways of searching for energy, and you're going to be able to piece that all together a lot more consistent than other types would be able to do that don't have things like fighting Gong and Lunatone and Solrock. Mega Brave for 2 energy deals 270 damage, and during your next turn, you can't use Mega Brave again. But again, with a couple of Premium Power Pro, you're easily one-shotting Stage 2 EX Pokemon, and sometimes even Mega Pokemon in just one attack. And given it only takes 2 fighting energy to use, you can very easily naturally pivot from Aura Jab into Mega Brave, securing a knockout and then potentially switching to another Mega Lucario on the following turn to use Mega Brave again. I already mentioned it earlier on, but this feels very comparable to something like Cynthia's Garchomp. I think that card gets a massive buff from this set as well. This feels like a Stage 1 version. It does give up an extra prize, but the damage is just a little bit higher, so you have to have less damage mods to potentially be able to get these one-shots on some of these powerful Pokemon. And it's just going to be weighing up whether it's worth giving up an extra prize to be a Stage 1, instead of only giving up 2 prizes but being a Stage 2. The Riolu in this set has 80 HP and does 30 for 1, which again, you can buff up that damage with Premium Power Pro to start the prize race quite quickly. But we do have a few other Riolu in format, all of them have 70 HP, so they're Buddy Buddy Poffin searchable. So you will essentially have to work out whether you want to play Buddy Buddy Poffin and have less damage output, or rely entirely on things like Fighting Gong and Nest Ball, but have more damage with just 1 energy attachment with the new Riolu's attack. We also have the Baby Lucario from Scarlet and Violet and Paldean Fates that has the Avenging Knuckle attack that lets you deal 150 damage if any of your fighting Pokemon were knocked out on the previous turn, which again, with some damage modification, can mean that you're able to uptrade with a 1 prize option and not be forced into having to use 3 prize Pokemon all throughout the game for your opponent to try and just win in 2 KOs. There's also a new Hariyama we'll talk about later on that could be powerful with this. And similarly, some of the other cards that benefit Mega Pokemon, things like Wally, can potentially make this very powerful. I think probably the best way of playing this is going to be having a deck built entirely around Mega Lucario. Some decks in Japan have played a thick Hariyama line up to 3-3, whilst other builds have played none and just played the Lunatone Solrock engine. So I think it's still a bit up in the air as to how best to play this card. But I think given how low effort and low maintenance this card is, a quad style deck makes the most sense, just so you can fill your deck with then important trainer cards and consistency cards to make sure you're doing this as frequently as possible every single game. Now, like I said at the start, it is really bad that this is weak to Gardevoir and Clefairy. Neither of these cards are going anywhere. Gardevoir looks to get some buffs, and Clefairy is still super splashable. So you're definitely going to have to dodge and weave the Psychic types. I really don't see how you can actually put up much of a fight into them, given that you give up 3 prizes and are so easily KO'd by so many of them. And ultimately, that is probably what's going to cap Lucario's potential in this format, just because the meta isn't quite right for it. I think the card is incredibly powerful, there's a lot of really good stats here, but just the fact it's weak to Psychic makes it really, really precarious to play. And I think, if I'm being honest, it's going to put a lot of people off, just because having a bad matchup to one of the best, if not the best deck in format, can sometimes be a complete death sentence when it comes to taking this to a tournament. It's a real shame because I think Mega Lucario is very cool, and I think in the right format could have been quite scary given how efficient this card is. But for now, I don't think this is going to be reaching any heights much higher than mid-tier, and may have to wait until Gardevoir rotates in a few months' time to finally reach the potential I think the card has.
Welcome back, Tag Team Pokemon, because Mega Absol EX is a 280 hit point 3 prize basic Dark type, and it has 2 attacks, Doom Period and Cruel Claw. The first attack here, Doom Period, is probably the most interesting one. For 1 Darkness and 1 Colourless, if your opponent's active Pokemon has exactly 6 damage counters on it, that Pokemon is knocked out. This reads similarly to an old Yveltal EX's GX attack, the Doom Count, that did see a sparing amount of play every now and then, and our format actually has a lot of ways that we can try and manipulate damage counters. We have Monkey Dory, we have Starmie, we have Petrarunt, Rocky Helmet, Dangerous Ruins, we have Team Rocket's Crobat and Golbat, we have Iron Valiant, we have Team Rocket's Venture Bomb, to name a few. So in theory, some sort of combination of these cards within your deck can create a situation where your Doom Period is going to be taking clean KOs. No doubt there are a few issues here, of course, because many other decks also play Monkey Dory, and actually even Picnic Basket is seeing a lot of play as of late, so undoing some of your Absol math could be a big issue. Especially when our alternate attack only deals 200 damage, you essentially also need to use these damage modifiers if you want to be taking clean knockouts with your second attack as well. Also, these attack costs aren't cheap. We need to probably play Janine's Secret Art or play something like Crispin in the deck as well, unless we're doing strange E-Switch shenanigans. So I'm not expecting much from a purely Absol EX based deck. The one thing I would call out is that it is a dark type coverage basic that could work with Prism Energy if you want to have a Pokemon that can KO Gardevoir easily, similar to Roaring Moon, but of course this one's a bigger basic that might be able to sponge a few more attacks.
Mega Mawile is another basic Mega EX Pokemon. It's a 270 HP basic metal type. It's got 2 attacks, it's got Greedily Devour for 2 metal energy, and Big Bite for 2 metal and a colourless. That Greedily Devour attack deals 80 damage times the number of prize cards you've taken for 2 metal energy, which is actually a very powerful finisher attack, especially if you've taken 3 or 4 prizes already. You can easily be one-shotting a lot of Pokemon, sometimes potentially even Stage 2 Pokemon or Mega EXs if you've taken enough prizes. I think the best application for this card will be in Archaladon, and I think that's how we've seen it mostly so far in the early tournaments in Japan. Literally just as a one-off, just to give a late-game attacker for that deck. Obviously, Archaladon's attack damage is capped at 220 right now, which can mean closing out games can be quite difficult right now. Archaladon really hasn't seen much play for a long time, partly due to the fact that there's a lot of one-shot in the format right now, but also partly because 220, I think, has started to get worse and worse now that there are more Stage 2s in the format. So being able to have a basic option that can deal more than 220 damage could potentially be what Archaladon has been looking for. Archaladon lists in the past have already played things like Venture Bomb and Monkey Dory to help boost that damage a little bit more, so sometimes you won't even need to take an extra prize to reach the next KO. You'll just need some damage from a Monkey Dory or a Venture Bomb to get you over the line. And I suppose there will sometimes be applications for its second attack, Big Bite, which deals 260 damage, but if your opponent has any damage counters already on them, the attack only does 30 instead. Now that is a pretty big downgrade, but the idea is Big Bite can hopefully try and get some KOs on some of the Pokemon that Archaladon wouldn't normally be able to get KOs on, before Greedily Devour is then able to get KOs on the rest. I think that really will be last resort. I don't think you want to be using Mega Mawile if you can help it, unless you're using it to close out the game, because having a 270 HP 3-prizer on the board is a bit scary. Especially given it's also weak to fire, which is a type that you don't want to be weak to right now because there's a lot of Goldengo counters out there. So most of the time I think you basically want to just bench this and power this up on the turn that you want to win the game with Greedily Devour. I don't think this will push Archaladon to be a super top tier contender again, but I do think this is definitely a one-of inclusion into that deck, and will make it better than where it is right now. And because of that, it may be a reason to try out Archaladon once again.
Next up we have the Mega Latias EX and Latios. Mega Latias EX is a 280 hit point dragon type basic Pokemon with 2 attacks here, the Strafe attack for just 1 colourless, and the Mirage Pulse for fire, psychic and colourless. The Strafe attack is just a cheeky poke for 40, but it does allow you to switch this Pokemon with one of your benched Pokemon, and that does actually synergize with the energy acceleration option we have, which I'll be getting into in a moment. Actually, that 40 damage poke could be really handy when you're facing opposing Mega decks or into Stage 2 EX Pokemon. Even though you're not knocking out a basic very cleanly, it could set you up for a Mirage Pulse KO once they evolve up. At the same time, as we know, if we're jumping to the bench, we can always try and pivot into a frustrating Pokemon, be it a Safeguard like Mimikyu or Cornerstone, or something like Mischievous Lock from a Klefki. Although it's only an early game strategy for this deck, it could cause headache for some opponents. Especially when we naturally play Psychic Energy in the deck anyway, Mimikyu can be a decent Pokemon to throw in just as a one-off. Then we have the Mirage Pulse then. We dish out 300 damage and discard all energy from this Pokemon. It's actually really easy to power up a Mirage Pulse. We can use Ethan's Ho-Oh EX to Golden Flame 2 Fire Energy onto itself. Then we can use the Luster Assist from Latios here. Once during your turn, when your Mega Latias EX moves from the bench to your active, you may move any number of energy from your benched Pokemon to that active Pokemon. So we chuck them onto Ho-Oh, then yoink them with our Mega Latias when we come into the active spot, and then manually attach a Psychic Energy here. As we've seen from Terra Pikachu EX, 300 isn't necessarily the best of thresholds. Yes, it gets through basic and Stage 1 EX Pokemon, but normally it falls a little bit short of those Stage 2s and the new Megas coming out. Gravity Mounting can help out against the Stage 2 Pokemon, but we may need a little bit more help dealing with new Megas cleanly for one hit. The comparison with Pikachu is quite fair and it doesn't look that great. The Latias only has 80 more hit points on the Pikachu, but that can be offset by the Resolute Heart anyway, so in some regards this is a less tanky Pokemon that gives up an additional prize card to do essentially the same thing as a Pikachu. I think generally it's more easy to chain Mirage Pulse. However, the drawback of giving up that additional prize is palpable, especially when your deck is naturally going to play single prizes and 2 prize Pokemon in your deck regardless, just to get this Pulse off, so your opponent can sculpt that easy prize map because you have to have these benched Pokemon in play at all times to chain your Mirage Pulse. It's tough to see much success from this card, with the likes of Pikachu being in format, as well as Raging Bolt and Golden Go as well. I think all of these are going to be quite favourable into this deck. Also bear in mind that Lillie's Clefairy EX is a tech in all sorts, and that gives a whole host of other decks an easy means of hitting that 280 as well.
The final Mega of the set is Mega Kangaskhan EX, a 300 HP colourless type basic Pokemon with the Run Errand ability and the Rapid Fire combo attack. Now, Run Errand is a fantastic ability. It says once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may use the ability to draw 2 cards. You can only use one Run Errand ability each turn, but it's just an additional draw 2 if Mega Kangaskhan is in the active. With cards like Latias EX, it shouldn't be too difficult getting Mega Kangaskhan in and out, especially if it's just after a KO your opponent's taken. You can easily just throw Mega Kangaskhan up into the active, draw 2 cards with Run Errand, and then retreat it into your attacker using Latias's ability. And I think similarly to things like Mew EX, Pheasantipity, this could be an application for Mega Kangaskhan. Now it is a bench-sitting 3-prize Pokemon instead of a 2-prize Pokemon, but it does at least have 300 HP, which is good. It's going to be a little bit more survivable than things like Mew EX and Fez. And these 2 extra cards can be quite powerful for some of these combo-based aggressive 2-prize archetypes, things like your Raging Bolts and stuff like that. Just having an additional draw 2 can get you to your next Sada, get you to that Prime Catcher, get you to those additional energy. That alongside all of the other draw that your deck has, especially when your strategy is entirely built around playing supporters other than draw supporters to attach energy and things like that. It's also just a really nice ability to have if you're playing a Mega Kangaskhan EX deck. Just an additional couple of cards every turn. We've seen how important that can be for decks like Goldengo, and even though you can only use one of these abilities per turn, you'll quite quickly see how useful it is just having an additional draw 2 every turn. Being a colourless type, you do benefit from all of the support that we gain from the Stellar Crown set. Things like Glass Trumpet, things like Buffalant. All of these cards are going to make it really easy to build a deck around Mega Kangaskhan. I think it's probably going to look similar to the Terapagos decks. Potentially so similar that all you're really doing is just subbing out Terapagos for Mega Kangaskhan. Because you've already got 300 HP and access to Buffalant's damage reduction, as well as being a basic, you can use Bravery Charm. You can easily have well over 400 HP that your opponent has to get through in one shot if they want to try and KO a Mega Kangaskhan. You could even run something like Hero's Cape to really push that HP. And like I said, you can use Glass Trumpet, you can use things like Crispin to potentially try and power up Rapid Fire combo. Unfortunately, things like Reversal and Ignition Energy don't work for Mega Kangaskhan, so you may have to find a different form of energy acceleration to power up Rapid Fire combo if you do need to switch between multiple Mega Kangaskhan's and try and make use of how tanky they are. You can always use things like Xatu and Electric for specific energy acceleration as well, though things like Crispin and Glass Trumpet will probably give you more flexibility, though I suppose Xatu and Electric do open the door to having other attackers in your deck, not just Mega Kangaskhan too. You're still going to need bench space for your Buffalants though, so I'm not sure you'll have the bench space to have energy acceleration on the board too. I think the biggest downside of Mega Kangaskhan is actually the effect of Rapid Fire combo. It deals 200 for 3, which isn't terrible. It does KO some bench-sitting EX Pokemon. Though to be able to do more than that, you do have to rely on coin flips, and I think ultimately that's going to be what causes this to be unreliable. You're just going to have very inconsistent damage output. You're never going to know whether you can guaranteed get a KO because it's going to be down to the coin flips. And I don't think decks that are built around attacks like that often do well. Now this could break the mold with how tanky Mega Kangaskhan is and how much damage reduction we have. And it does have a solid base damage, so it's not like you're sometimes doing nothing at all. You're still two-shotting pretty much every Pokemon in the format, which is good. But I do think we have plenty of ways of having more reliable damage output, as well as having a lot of Pokemon that can one-shot in the format right now, which on the one hand makes Kangaskhan a bit weaker just because there are some Pokemon that are just going to be able to basically ignore all of your damage reduction, and they're just going to be able to get a KO on one-shot anyway, things like Raging Bolt and Goldengo. But also, it means that people are going to look to those decks instead of Mega Kangaskhan that can do more damage, rather than having to rely on coin flips to be able to get one-shots. I think that's why ultimately Mega Kangaskhan role will probably end up being potentially a draw Pokemon in some decks, or it may just be relegated to the binder, especially while we're in a format where there's a lot of Pokemon that have unlimited damage cap right now. It may be too fragile even at 300 HP to be a bench-sitting draw Pokemon with the Run Errand ability for decks like Raging Bolt. We'll have to wait and see, but I do think Mega Kangaskhan falls just in that mid-tier for now. You can never really ignore draw Pokemon, they can sometimes be very powerful, but when they're on a 3-prize Pokemon, they can also be a huge liability.
There's a new Meganium coming out from the set. It's a 160 hit point grass type stage 2 that has the Wild Growth ability here, as well as the Solar Beam attack. Wild Growth states that each basic grass energy attached to your Pokemon provides 2 grass energy, and you can't apply more than 1 Wild Growth ability at a time. Yes, it's the return of Jungle Totem, and there are so many ways that we can start flooding our grass energy around the board. We have the Teal Mask from Ogerpon, and Myriad Leaf Shower does more for each energy attached to both actives, actually pushing Ogerpon into potentially a dangerous attacking threat just by having this Stage 2 in your list. Equally, if you want to go whole hog and have multiple Stage 2s, possibly leaning towards the Vitality Forest Stadium card, we could look towards Hydrapple EX with its Syrup Storm attack, which has 30 plus 30 more for each grass attached to all of your Pokemon. Now that surely must be taking KOs with Meganium in the mix if you're using those Ogerpons on your bench. There's also potential to combine this with your Mega Venusaur EX, again looking towards multiple Stage 2 Pokemon. Does look threatening on paper, but with Vitality Forest it might feel a little bit easier. It makes the Jungle Dump much more efficient as an attacking threat, and might even give you some sort of bounce back if a Mega Venusaur is KO'd. Surely you can still float 1 energy during the game, and still push it all towards your next Mega Venusaur to have some sort of a follow-up. There's no shortage of options really for Meganium, with Grass being such a prevalent type in the game right now, but it does feel like that we're going to be filling our deck with a lot of non-consistency cards just to get some bigger upside, which I think ultimately may not be worthwhile.
Next up, we have Shuckle with its Ferment Juice ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon has any grass energy attached to it, you may use the ability to heal 30 damage from one of your Pokemon. Now, this is kind of like a pacifist's version of Monkey Dory. It doesn't deal the damage, it just heals the damage. And I think realistically, this is only going into one deck. It's going to be that Mega Venusaur deck. When turns that you don't want to use Wally, you're going to be able to bench some Shuckle. You can Solar Trans the energy around and use multiple Ferment Juice abilities during your turn to try and mitigate some of the damage your opponent's done. Mega Venusaur also has the other Venusaur EX from 151, which can heal if it's in the active as well. So you can heal a lot of damage from your grass Pokemon should they survive a hit, which is going to be the key part. But I think this has come out at a really weird time because of Wally being printed. I think a lot of the time you'd rather just use Wally. I think it's going to be rare that your opponent's done such a small amount of damage that multiple Shuckle can get rid of all of it. There'll be situations where Shuckle can turn a 2-shot into a 3-shot, for example, and it may just be playing Shuckle as a 1 or 2 of in that deck, just for that situation specifically, especially given that your opponent sometimes won't be able to make use out of the 1 prizes on your board because they're still going to have to go through multiple 3-prize Mega Venusaurs. But I don't really see this in any other deck. I don't think it's powerful enough to be played in any other deck. And I'm not even convinced it's going to be in the Mega Venusaur deck itself. So won't really be having a huge impact at all.
We also have a Ninjask and Shedinja from the set that combine well together. The Stage 1 Ninjask is an 80 hit point grass type that has the Cast Off Shell ability and the U-turn attack. Cast Off Shell, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may search your deck for Shedinja and put it onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. Then we have the U-turn attack for Grass Colourless that deals 90 and switches this with one of your benched Pokemon. The idea being, for the most part, that you're pushing your Shedinja that you've just searched into the active spot, thanks to its Fragile Shell ability. If this Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon EX, your opponent can't take any prize cards for it. Not quite as powerful as something like a Mimikyu, but something we can pull out the deck for free. Naturally has free retreat, and also comes with the attack damage beat for 1 psychic energy, dealing 20 for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. I think the main synergy between the two is that U-turn dealing 90 will happily set up the Shedinja for a damage beat on the following turn. However, Shedinja only is protected from damage of attacks, and we know a bunch of EX Pokemon can play around that. And naturally, with Mimikyu and Crushel already being decks in the meta, most archetypes should have an answer to 1 or 2 Shedinja, especially with an even more fragile hit points. I think Ninjask had to do a little bit more damage for me to be too excited about this one, but it's been a while since we've seen a really valid hit and run strat, and we do have some good abilities starting to stack up here with Cornerstone, with Klefki and whatnot. And with Ninjask having a natural free retreat, having a natural way to search your Walling Mon, it might be a little bit more consistent than you would expect, with really the low hit points of the 2 Stage 1s being the main drawback.
Next up, we have Cinderace, 160 HP Fire type. It's a Stage 2, but Explosiveness says if this Pokemon is in your hand when you're setting up to play, you may put it face down as your active Pokemon. Now, of course, we have seen this ability before on Talonflame, and a similar version of it on Manectric. Manectric didn't really do anything, but it was only if you were going second that you could use this, whereas Talonflame could be used going first or second, so I do think this is better than Manectric. but I don't think it's better than Talonflame because I think Aeroblitz was better than Flare Turbo. Flare Turbo for 1 colourless energy deals 50 damage, and you can search your deck for up to 3 basic energy and attach them to your benched Pokemon in any way you like. That's some very powerful energy acceleration, especially if you can power up something like an Iron Hands on turn 1 to be able to start using Ampy very much from turn 2. And I suppose you may have ended up setting something up with Flare Turbo to help you get an extra prize with Ampy very much on the following turn. But I think the biggest issue is actually this acceleration is really unreliable, because if you don't start Cinderace, you do need some kind of other energy acceleration in your deck as a backup plan. The difference with Talonflame when it was played in Greninja was that Greninja could set up without Talonflame. Talonflame just helped your following turns be more optimal, whereas Cinderace differs slightly in that you still need to have a backup plan. I think some decks could potentially try running Cinderace. You'll definitely lose an element of consistency in your deck because you'll probably need to play 4 Cinderace for it to feel impactful. And I think it's going to be really difficult to find a deck that can play Cinderace and play a backup energy acceleration strategy, just in case you don't get to use explosiveness. It's going to be interesting to see if any decks adopt this. I'm not convinced personally, but I also wasn't a big believer in Talonflame back in the day, and that one proved me wrong, so I'm willing to be proved wrong once again with Cinderace. Next up we have Kyogre, 150 HP water type with the Riptide attack. For 1 water energy you deal 20 damage times the number of each water energy cards in your discard pile, and then you shuffle them back into your deck. Now this works really well with the Mega Abomasnow Joe was talking about earlier on. It's a great 1 prize attacker for that deck, it's already seen some play, and again similar to strategies we've talked about earlier on, you can play a couple of Kyogres and not have to worry about your opponent getting the prize cards on them because they still have to go through 2 Megas and take 8 prizes to win the game. Now like we said, we're not overly sure how powerful this Mega Abomasnow deck is going to be. Typically decks that have over 20 energy in them don't do particularly well. But Victini Prism Star was an under-the-radar card that did incredibly well at Worlds 2019 that had a very similar attack, so there have been instances where decks have a boatload of energy in them and do still see success. I don't really think there's going to be any other applications for this outside of Mega Abomasnow, so it's going to completely depend on whether that strategy is any good or not, but it definitely makes sense as a one-of in that deck as a late-game option.
We have a Stage 1 Clawitzer, which is a 130 hit point water type, and has the reverse and reload ability, as well as the Aqua Launcher attack. And the two synergize really nicely here. Once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from the active spot to the bench, you may attach up to 2 basic water energy from your hand to this Pokemon. With the Surfing Beach Stadium card, as well as the 2 retreat cost on Clawitzer being able to go to 0 with an air balloon, it shouldn't be too difficult to keep reloading between your Clawitzers and announcing the 210 damage Aqua Launcher attack, discarding all energy from this Pokemon. 210 is decent damage output, and of course we also have Brave Bangle that can push you into one-hit KOing basic EX Pokemon. And maybe this card could go alongside of Palafin EX so that you have a tankier option as well as a single prize option in your deck, depending on what matchup you're in. And yes, there could be some minor synergy with Shivery Chill Chenpao as well, pulling energy out the deck, then starting to pivot around with your beaches and your reverses and whatnot. Because bear in mind, the Surfing Beach is a switch effect, not a retreat. So your water types can really be dancing all around the board to make this work. Is there enough upside? Probably not. Is it going to be a new fun way to play this pivoting water deck? Perhaps. So definitely a fun rogue, but not too much playability here when water isn't really hitting too much of a weakness right now.
On to Inteleon, a Stage 2 150 HP water type with the Bring Down attack. We have seen this attack before. Bring Down says the Pokemon in play that has the least HP remaining, except for Inteleon, is now knocked out. If there's multiple Pokemon, you get to choose which one you're knocking out. Gardevoir Level X had this attack, and this card was very powerful, but it wasn't because of this attack that the card was very powerful. There was a lot of reasons, including the fact that it was able to access other attacks and had a fantastic Pokepower at the time, whereas Inteleon is pretty much a one-trick pony, and I think right now Bring Down isn't particularly powerful in the format because we're in an evolution format. All of the Pokemon you want to be knocking out are evolution-based, but more often than not your opponent will have low HP basics that they're evolving into on their board, which have to be the target of Bring Down. If we were in a format where there was lots of basic EX decks, then an attack like this would be much better, but it's still never going to be worth playing a Stage 2 just for an attack like this, so unfortunately Inteleon is not going to be particularly impactful at all.
Small nod to an upgrade of Magnemite that we're getting from the set. As we know, Magneton's Overvolt Discharge has great synergy in a sort of Iron Hands Zekrom EX Miraidon based deck, and I think the fact that we get this 10 hit point buff is actually somewhat of a big deal, so that we're not forced into an early Magneton just to protect ourselves from getting pinged down by Dragapult or by a bunch of Munkidori or whatnot, it does give the Lightning deck a bit of wiggle room to actually find its stage 1 in time, to be able to use the discharge more when you want to, rather than when you have to, because the 60 hit points is too much of a liability.
Onto Kadabra and Alakazam then. I've already talked about these two a little bit. Kadabra and Alakazam both have the Psychic Draw ability. In Kadabra's case, when you play Kadabra to evolve your Abra, you draw 2 cards, and in Alakazam's case, you draw 3. Now, draw power on an ability can never really be ignored, especially when it is somewhat unconditional. You do obviously have to evolve these Pokemon to draw with them, but you don't have to discard or anything like that, so that is good at least. And the fact this is splashable is really powerful. It means that you don't have to worry about playing a specific type or a specific archetype, you just get to draw 2 cards when you evolve. But ultimately, there's going to be better draw engines out there, ones that you can use multiple times. You don't really want to have to play a draw engine where you have to use something like Suspicious Watch to get multiple uses out of it. And having a stage 2 draw engine is going to make your deck a little bit clunkier. Even though you're drawing more cards, you have to find space for a stage 2 in your deck to be able to get the draw going. So because of that, there's going to be better draw engines out there, and I don't think Kadabra or Alakazam are going to be fitting into anything immediately. Though again, just having unconditional draw engines is good to have in the format. You never know when they could be useful, so definitely one to keep in the back of your mind.
We have a stage 1 Grumpig, which is a psychic type with 120 hit points, with the Energy Step ability, as well as the unimpressive Psychic Sphere attack. Energy Step, once during your turn, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, you may look at the top 4 cards of your deck and attach any number of basic energy cards you find there to your Pokemon in any way that you like. This is actually very similar to a Gloom that we already have in format, but you actually get to look at one more card, so it is more reliable than that stage 1, bearing in mind though that Gloom also had a Vileplume that then allowed you to look at the top 8. So I think on average, Grumpig comes out less favourably than that stage 2 line. The only upside is that we have the Suspicious Watch now that you can just sort of keep going from Grumpig to Spoink and whatnot and sort of bouncing between your pigs. It is Universal Energy Acceleration, but we have so many options in the format right now between Crispin, between E-Switch plays, whether it's from Ogerpon or Glass Trumpet or whatnot. I think we normally have much more space-efficient means of getting our energy into play, no matter what type they are.
Up next, we have Hariyama, 150 HP fighting type with the Sumo Catcher ability. It says when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. So this is essentially Boss's Orders on an ability. We've already seen this on Dubwool. This hasn't been too powerful on Dubwool, but I do think it will be slightly better on Hariyama, just because Hariyama can use its Wild Press attack too. Now you can use something like Hilda to search out for Hariyama plus Reversal Energy, and you can use Sumo Catcher to gust up your opponent's Pheasantipity EX or Mew EX, and then use Wild Press to get a KO. This is all on a 1 prize Pokemon as well, meaning that you're not leaving a 2 or 3 prize liability in the active spot. And if you have all of these cards without using Hilda, you can even pair it with some hand disruption as well. I think this could naturally fit into Lucario. We've already seen some lists in Japan that play a very thick Hariyama line. That means you don't always have to rely on playing Boss as your supporter for turn. You can potentially weave in some other supporters as well. But also, I think the Hilda package with a Reversal Energy means that Hariyama could fit in a lot of different decks and potentially be used as a 2 prize swing turn, whilst also gusting up an important Pokemon on your opponent's bench. I don't think this is going to be much better than Dubwool. I still think Boss will be the primary way of gusting things up. But just the fact that you can attack with Hariyama and it can be more than just a gusting threat, I think at least gives it promise. And it's going to be really interesting to see if any decks try and implement this, or whether it just ends up falling to the same fate as Hop's Dubwool, and Boss's Orders just ends up being the optimal option as always.
I'm really excited about this combination of basics we have here, Solrock and Lunatone, both of which are fighting types with 110 hit points. Lunatone has the Lunar Cycle ability and the Power Gem attack, whereas Solrock just comes with the Cosmo Beam attack. Starting with Solrock, it's for 1 fighting energy, you deal 70 damage, it isn't affected by weakness or resistance. However, if you don't have Lunatone on your bench, this attack does nothing. This reminds me a lot of Fan Rotom, which is an excellent Pokemon at simply initiating a prize race. The fact that this isn't affected by resistance is a huge deal here, so we can still be knocking out Ralts, as well as basically all the other evolving basics. It should be pretty easy to get your Lunatone in play. If you're playing a combination of Nest Balls, Fighting Gongs, possibly Artisan as well, this should be a pretty routine means of getting that Solrock attack, actually more likely than Fan Rotom ever could. This could be a great way to tee off some pressure if you're playing an evolving Garchomp deck, which normally would just sit back, or something like a Lucario as well, allowing you to have an early game board presence of just single prizes, knowing that you're going to pivot to a sort of mid to late game double Mega Lucario approach. Trying to force the 8 prize game, similar to how we used to see something like Volcanions in a Green's Reshizard style deck. You start off with the single prizes, then you pivot to the 3 prizes, knowing that it's still faster for your opponent to deal with your remaining 3 prize Pokemon and sort of run yourself out of those single prizes. Solrock's pressure is one thing, but it's really all about the Lunatone's ability, Lunar Cycle. Once during a turn, if you have a Solrock in play, you may discard a basic fighting energy from your hand in order to use the ability. Draw 3 cards. You can't use more than 1 Lunar Cycle ability each turn. This is essentially a fighting version of Radiant Greninja, but actually draws +1 card, the trade-off being that you had to have 2 bench spaces committed to your Lunatone combo. I think this is a really powerful basic Pokemon. It could easily make its way into Garchomp and Lucario like I've mentioned already, but I also think Ceruledge could take advantage of this card. Ceruledge is an archetype that typically has the sort of board space to make this combo work, and would appreciate an early aggressive Solrock attack, as well as some nice backup draw power, similar to how we've seen Revavroom sometimes make it into their deck. I'm really excited to start playing around with both these basics. I think they have bags of potential, and I'm giving them that star rating to prove it. Once again, I'm a believer in fighting. I think the Gong is a huge deal, but I also like the backdoor Ceruledge plays now, giving it early game pressure and that late game consistency that it constantly yearns for.
Onto Spiritomb then. Its Resentful Maelstrom ability says, whenever your active Dark Pokemon is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, put 1 damage counter on the attacking Pokemon. Now, this could naturally work very well with that Mega Absol Joe talked about earlier on. You can potentially have multiple of these on your board at once, meaning that any damage they deal to your active Pokemon, they're taking up to 4 damage counters back. And in combination with something like a Rocky Helmet, you can easily get enough damage onto the opponent's active Pokemon, so that Absol's attack Doom period can just be used straight away. However, I can't see too many uses for this outside of that, and I do think the Munkidori Frostlass idea is probably better than using Spiritomb, but did at least just think it was worth acknowledging that it does pair pretty well with that Absol we talked about earlier. I don't really see this having any other impact in Standard. Arguably, this can be used in things like Grimmsnarl and Charizard, but I think ultimately Munkidori is just going to be a better version of this Spiritomb in almost every situation, and don't see Spiritomb having too much of an impact in the meta overall.
There's a new Yveltal, which is a basic dark type with 110 hit points. It comes with the Clutch attack as well as Dark Feather. Notably, this Pokemon also has a free retreat cost, which is the main reason we're discussing this card, because it could be an upgrade to the currently used Maractus within Grimmsnarl decks, because Clutch is the attack that we're looking at here. During your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat for 1 Darkness energy. That's the energy cost that, of course, Grimmsnarl already uses, so this could be a natural pivot within your deck that still maintains the retreat lock. Currently, Grimmsnarl has to play Air Balloon within its deck to sort of support a Maractus approach, and in some instances is forced to attach multiple times to the Maractus in order to move it when you want to pivot out of corner. The only real upside of Maractus is the Exploding Needles ability that could sometimes help out setting up math across a board. But for the most part, it looks like the Yveltal will be the buff in the deck, giving yourself a natural pivot in the list, and making it easier to switch out of the Clutch approach once you've set up enough damage with Munkidori and Frostlass to get back into the mix with Grimmsnarl or Blood Moon.
Onto the metal types then, and Tinkertuff has the Surprise Hammer ability. This is when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn. You may use this ability, you can flip a coin, and if heads, discard an energy, attach your opponent's active Pokemon. So essentially it's a Crushing Hammer on an ability rather than on an item card. I don't think this is really going to be that powerful. Most of the time, things like Elgium, Handheld Fan, moving energy onto your opponent's bench Pokemon where they don't want the energy is often better because they can't recover it. But it is a nice ability to have, especially against decks like Dragapult, which have very specific attack costs. You're probably going to play 4 of these in the Tinkerton deck. That could be a new 1-prize archetype that feels very similar to Typhlosion, just a low energy 1-prize attacker which deals a lot of damage. Tinkerton's Large Swing attack deals 240 for 1 energy, but 60 less for each energy attached to the opponent's active Pokemon, so you can see why you would want to play Tinkertuffs, why you would want to play Hammers, why you would want to play Handheld Fans, to make sure Large Swing is doing as much damage as possible. And we also have the Gather Materials Tinkerton from earlier sets that lets you discard a card to draw 3, so that's another option that you can play in the deck. We've also got Genesect to be able to search out for Tinkertuff and Tinkerton quite consistently. So you can kind of see how this deck might end up functioning similarly to Typhlosion, albeit I do think this will be worse. While some builds of Typhlosion do have 2 prize Pokemon on the board, not all of them rely on this, whereas I do think you're going to have Genesect on the board to be able to search out for your Tinkertons consistently. And also Quilava is a stage 1 Pokemon, which is kind of like your consistency Pokemon, whereas in this case it's coming from a stage 2 Tinkerton, and I think that will make a big difference. However, this could be a cool 1 prize archetype to try out that will, I think, feel similar to Typhlosion, and will potentially be able to cheese some wins moving and discarding some energy with the Tinkertuffs and the Hammers and the handheld fans. So it could be a fun one to try. I'm not convinced this will ever be anything other than a fun archetype, but these 1 prize archetypes do sometimes surprise us, so it could be one to try out.
We have the stage 1 colourless Pokemon Gumshoos here that has 100 hit points. It has the ability Gather Evidence, as well as an uninspiring Bite attack. Gather Evidence states, once during your turn you may use the ability, switch a card from your hand with the top card of your deck. Yep, we have Primate Wisdom back, but now it's on a stage 1 Pokemon. That's a real turn off, because it's slower to get this into play and more commitment of spaces, and we have the headache of prizing 1/2 of the 1/1 line. Just a lot of issues here. Also, don't forget we already have the Academy at Night Stadium, which is seeing really sparing play, to be honest with you. I don't think it's a big deal. Maybe this card is a small upgrade to Slowking, but it's just another stage 1 coming into the deck anyway. I don't know, even though Oranguru was such an incredible ability, I feel like putting it on a stage 1 really hinders it quite a lot, and I don't think there's that many archetypes right now that necessarily yearn for this effect. So unfortunately, we're giving Donald a low rating.
And that's it, that wraps up our Mega Evolution set review. What Mega Pokemon are you most looking forward to playing? Did we miss anything in our set review? And do you disagree with any of our ratings at all? Let us know down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to drop it a like, and we look forward to seeing you guys in another video tomorrow.